It's Betty. Hi. I'm going to come sit down with you. It is that time again. You believe it? It's been a week since we've already been talking, and I'm really excited because you've spent a little time with us this week, haven't you? It's really fun. So we're upstairs right by the chapel in what we sometimes call our library, because a lot of the books are up here, and it's kind of fun to be able to read a book from a library.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's like stuff over there and right here.
Yeah, that's true. What's over there is kind of a, I guess you'd call a Neshoda House collection. You know what Neshoda House is? Well, it's a seminary. It's where men go to become priests, and the priest who wrote this book used to be a professor there years ago. And this is really cool. His grandson just graduated from the Neshoda House. And these are prayers and pictures and things. Papa's had an association with that place for about 50 years. Yeah. So I've had a chance to read a lot of wonderful things and put a lot of them in here. But you know, of all the students I've had over the years, in university, in seminary, and other places, in churches, I really look forward to this every week. This is a lot of fun to be with you. Anything exciting happened to you this week?
Yeah, we went to airport.
We did. They're reopening some of the places now, aren't they? And Airborne is a place where you can go and jump. So I think jumping.
And also do other things like dodgeball and jump into like this pit thingy and also others.
You know, there are times when adults wish they could do things like that. Did you know that? But sometimes adults are too embarrassed to say that they miss doing things like that. And so sometimes what they do is they go and watch kids do it, and then they pretend that it's them. But one of the things I love about you, Betty, is you involve me in a lot of things with you, so I can still be a kid with you, and we can still have fun. Now, we're sitting here with some very interesting things that aren't going to make so much sense today. But if you look at there, would you say that that's unusual lettering? Because you're a very good reader, but do you recognize any of those words?
Is that an A?
See, it almost looks like that, but it's called Hebrew. And it's a language that was spoken by the Jewish people, and Bible writ Old Testament in that language. And there are people who now speak modern Hebrew, but these elements here are all from a very special meal. No, it really isn't. I don't know where that came from. Yeah, you can take it up. Thank you. Because we are going to be entering into a really remarkable time where all of these things make sense. Now, do you remember that it was a rough time for the children of Israel, and they had to move last week down to a place called Egypt? And you remember what happened there is the brothers who had sold off their brother Joseph were surprised to find out that he was in charge.
Yeah, we're talking about Moses.
But today we're talking about Moses because this is the rest of the story. Anyway, it's from the book of Exodus. We're out of Genesis. This is the book of Exodus, chapters 1 through 4. So, we left the children of Israel settled in Egypt and enjoying the favor of the king because of Joseph's service to the country in time of famine. Well, a long, long time passed, and these Israelites almost forgot what it had been like to live the life of a nomadic herdsman. Now, a nomadic herdsman, that's somebody who doesn't have a real address. So that means that they pick up and they move someplace else with their tent whenever they need to go, to take their sheep, take anything that they needed to go eat.
So like a little market where you so you have these stuff and then you're gonna sell them.
Yeah.
So you get a tent and then you.
That's true.
And move places every time.
You know,
That place.
that's really good. It is like a market. And you do see when those tents are set up in farmers markets and other places, tents. We've gone to such places, haven't we? Yeah.
We went to a place where like you get something out of tent.
That's right.
And there's tables and then you put stuff on there and you can buy it.
That's true. And it's really fun because you get to see the things that the people in many instances either made or grew on their farms. And this is very true because these people had to move from place to place to make sure that they were able to sell, but also to make sure that their livestock could eat. So they were still Israelites, but they began to talk and think and dress and worship like their Egyptian neighbors. You know what that's a little bit like? Where was your mommy born?
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, in Pennsylvania. We didn't wear cowboy hats there. No.
Yeah.
But now that we live in,
People rarely wear cowboy hats.
yeah, that's true. And in Texas, where we live and where you were born, it's not uncommon to see cowboy hats, is it?
Well, if people just want to wear it, it's okay, but like there's no good reason to wear it.
Right, well, that's probably true, especially when they're sitting in a restaurant wearing a cowboy hat. I don't know if they think that that'll protect their heads or what.
Or like if you if it was like a Texas, I don't know.
You mean like a Texas restaurant, like a barbecue? Yeah, looks like it.
Barbecue.
Right, that's right. But now this Pittsburgher wears a cowboy hat. And that's what happened to these people. What it means is there they were living in Egypt and they started dressing like Egyptians. They started talking the language of the Egyptian people. They started telling Egyptian stories, and here's the worst part of it though for them. They started to worship like the Egyptian people who didn't believe in the one true God that the Israelites had always worshipped. They had all but forgotten God, but God had not forgotten them. One day, there was a revolution, and a new ruling family came to the throne. They began to persecute the Israelites. Imagine that. They said, these Israelites are different from us. And in case we're invaded, they may side with our enemies. So they made the Israelites slaves of the Egyptians, of that state that the Egyptians were in, put them to work making bricks to build big public buildings, but the Jews continued to multiply, more babies, and grow more numerous. And the king, or as they say there, the Pharaoh, got more and more afraid of them, because there were more of them, and they were different. He decreed that every Jewish boy, baby, that was born had to be killed.
What?
Yeah. Can you believe it? Isn't that nasty? That way he hoped that
No.
sooner or later.
Oh, sorry.
Huh?
I was gonna say mean.
Very mean. Very hateful.
And I don't think there's a reason for that.
There's no good reason for that. There really isn't. But the Pharaoh hoped that sooner or later there wouldn't be any more Jews if he killed them off. Not good thinking. One Jewish family decided they wouldn't obey such a cruel and a senseless law. So when they had a baby boy, the mother made a little basket of rushes, which is kind of like weaving with a basket, stopped up the cracks with some tar, put the baby in it, and set it down very carefully in the reeds along a river bank. Now the little baby's older sister hid herself in the bushes. so she could watch and see what would happen to her little baby brother so that he wouldn't be killed. Now the king's daughter, the Pharaoh's daughter, and her girlfriends had the habit of going swimming in the river every day. And after a little while, along they came, giggling and laughing, kind of like you do when you jump in our swimming pool.
Yeah.
That's right. Almost right away, one of them nearly stumbled over the basket with the baby in it, and the baby began to cry. Now, the king's daughter said, "Woo, look, a baby I wanted." And being the Pharaoh's daughter, she could have, well, almost anything she wanted. So the baby's sister came forward and said to the princess, "Pardon, ma'am, but would you like me to fetch a nursemaid for that baby?" And the princess said, "Oh, that's a splendid idea." So the little girl ran, and this is the tricky part, and fetched the baby's very own mother. And the princess hired this baby's mother, not knowing it was the baby's mother, to take care of the child and to nurse it and to help raise it. Now, what do you think of that? Wasn't that a lucky break? The princess named the little boy Moses, or some people say Moshe, Moses. And he was raised up in the palace just as if he were the king's own grandson. And he became one of the princes of Egypt. Have you ever heard of a movie by that name? Prince of Egypt?
I don't think so.
Well, that's something we're going to watch together then.
Okay.
Okay. And Moses was sent to the best schools and received all the honors of his high station and became a very important person in Egypt. By and by, after Moses was a grown man, he began to feel quite sorry for his Jewish kinsfolk who had to work and slave so hard building houses and roads and things for the Egyptians. One day, he was out riding in his fancy chariot, and he saw the Egyptian taskmaster beating up one of the Jewish workers. Moses jumped down from his chariot and clobbered the Egyptian, who fell over and hit his head on a rock and died. Well, that was a little bit more than Moses had bargained for, because even Egyptian princes couldn't get away with murder. The king heard about it and was angry with Moses and sent the police to arrest him. But Moses got wind of the fact that the police were after him, so he left the country. He traveled a long way out into the desert, finally came to the land of Midian, where he entered a little frontier village and sat down to rest and refresh himself by the town pump. You know, the water, to get the water. Yeah, that kind of pump. The most influential citizen in that town was the preacher, who was also an important rancher and landowner, a man by the name of Reuel, also known as Jethro. Do you have any friends named Jethro? Okay. This preacher fellow had 7 beautiful daughters who used to water their milk cows at the watering trough, where that pump was. And these good-looking girls would go there, and while Moses was sitting there resting, these good-looking girls came with their cows. And a bunch of drunken cowboys began to tease and annoy the girls. Moses, being a gentleman, wasn't going to stand for that sort of rough stuff. He'd been the heavyweight champion of his class at college, so he lit into those drunken cowboys, and in no time at all, they realized that discretion was the better part of valor and took off in a hurry. Moses, sort of panting and catching his breath, tipped his hat to the ladies and offered to draw water for them to water their stock, the animals. The girls giggled and they blushed at Moses. How do you giggle? Okay, good.
Something like that.
That's pretty good. And I think looks like you have a little bit of sun there.
Yes.
Okay, that looks a little bit like blushing, so we'll pretend you're blushing and giggling. And they went home and told their daddy what had happened about the handsome young Egyptian that had rescued them from the drunken cowboys and watered their stock. Their papa said, "Why in the world didn't you invite that nice young man home to supper? He'd probably enjoy a home-cooked meal after his long and tiresome journey through the desert. So the girls went back to town. They located Moses just as he was about to register for a room in the inn, or maybe it was a bed and breakfast, I don't know, and invited him home to supper with them. Moses was glad enough to accept their invitation. And that night, after supper, they sat and talked long into the night. And the upshot of it all was that Moses took a job with Jethro. In no time at all, he was made foreman of Jethro's ranch and had fallen in love with and married one of the 7 lovely daughters, a girl by the name of Zipporah. And they had a son. Moses was happy with Jethro and Zipporah and his baby boy, and he got to know the country well and became something of an expert in the problem of living in the desert country. Good thing, too, for he was going to need all his knowledge and skill in the years ahead for being in the desert country. One day, when Moses was out looking after the stock of the ranch, he came to the base of a mountain called Horeb. And away off over yonder, toward the mountain, he saw the strangest thing. It seemed to be a bush on fire.
What?
Yeah, and he watched it. Because a grass fire on rangeland is serious business, because it spreads. Moses expected the fire to burn itself out after a while, but this fire didn't burn out. It just kept on burning. So he went toward the fire that just kept on burning, and as he approached it, things got stranger yet. He heard a voice calling his name. And the voice seemed to come out of the midst of the burning bush. Yeah. He just stood there gawking. You know what gawking is?
No.
Can you do that? That's right. That's what he did. And the voice said, Moses, where are your manners? Take off your hat, and while you're about it, you can take off your shoes too, because the ground you're standing on is holy ground. Moses said, who in the world are you talking to me out of the fire? The voice almost barked at him. Never mind who I am. I said, get out of those boots. And it was so spooky that Moses jumped right out of his boots. There, that's better, said the voice. Now, as to who I am, it's enough for you to know that I am. I am. I'm the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. At this, Moses felt his toes curling up, and God continued, I've been in this, seen the trouble of my people down in Egypt.
Wait, is this how you get up your...
Let's see. Yeah, that's pretty good curling. How about that? Yeah, can you swim with your toes curled?
I think so.
Okay, we'll check it out later. And God continued, I've seen the trouble of my people down in Egypt. You're going to go to King Pharaoh and arrange to bring them out of there and lead them back to the Holy Land. Moses said, who? Me? And his voice kind of squeaked. And God said, oh, don't worry. I'll be right along with you. Then Moses began to try really hard to think of all kinds of excuses to get out of going, because he just couldn't imagine doing anything that big and important. And besides, he was scared, remembering that when he left Egypt, it was one jump ahead of the police. So he said, but what if the Hebrew people won't believe me and ask me the name of the God that I spoke to and the God that spoke to me? God replied, tell them that you asked me my name, and I just said, I am. Tell them, I am. Yes.
No, I am.
I am. Tell them it was the same God that their ancestors worshipped, Abraham and the rest. Now quit stalling and do as I tell you. Moses, still trying to think up excuses, said, but What if Pharaoh won't let us go? God replied, I'm quite sure he won't, but don't worry, I'll fix that. We'll perform enough miracles to keep him awake at night for the rest of his life. For example, what's that you've got there in your hand? Moses replied, oh, it's just a long wooden staff. Kind of like the kind I carry, you know? You know the crozier, the wooden, sometimes wooden, that I carry at Mass?
I think so.
Yeah, we have it in the chapel. So, Moses said, yeah, just a long wooden staff. God said, throw it to the ground. So Moses threw it on the ground, and it turned into a snake and began to wiggle off into the rocks.
What?
Yeah, afterwards, you better check and make sure none of my staffs did that, okay?
Okay.
God said, catch it quick before it gets away. Moses didn't even have time to think, or he'd likely have been afraid to pick up a live snake. But God's voice was so sharp that he grabbed the snake by the tail, and as soon as he touched it, it turned back into a long staff.
If I did that and then I threw one into the ground, it probably will break instead of turn into a snake.
I believe that that is a very accurate thought. That's what I think.
Yeah.
I think you've got that figured out. And that's based on kind of experience. So the things that we have that are based on experience is because we've seen it and understood it. But when God does a miracle, it doesn't mean we always understand it, because that's what a miracle's like. It's something that we can't explain based on our experiences. So, there it was, long staff again, and then God told Moses all about all the other kinds of magic tricks he would teach him. So, he could scare Pharaoh. Moses tried one last dodge. But God, he said, I can't convince anyone. I'm not a smart talker. I'll never make a preacher. You know that. God said, Moses, I'm ashamed of you. If I made your mouth, I guess I can find words to put in it. Besides, your brother, Aaron, is a glib talker. That means he had the gift of gab. That means he kissed the blarney stone. Look him up and get him to do your talking for you. But you hang on to that staff there. You'll find you can do a lot of magic with it. Between your magic and Aaron's speeches, you'll get along. Moses couldn't think up any more excuses. So he set out for Egypt, and looking up his folks, and told Aaron what had happened. Together they sat down to plan their campaign to get Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go free to leave Egypt. You can bet they sat up late many a night planning an operation that big. And of course, they said their prayers a lot too for God's guidance. Wow. So now, Moses is back in Egypt. He's talking to his family. He's telling them this is what God, whose name is I Am, says. And now we've got to figure out what happens next. Now, look on here. You see that picture? You happen to know the girl who drew these pictures. Her name's Jillian. It's your cousin Ellie's friend. Yeah. You know what I think we're going to do?
What?
Let's call Jillian and ask her if she wants to sit in with us one day when we're reading. And then she can explain why she did these beautiful pictures that are in this book. All right? Okay, well, everybody, we hope you have a wonderful week this week. We're having a wonderful week. And I have to tell you, if you can imagine, Betty and I always have good times together, don't we, sweetheart? We do. And we hope everybody out there is blessed to have people like Betty who can make you feel a lot better about yourself. Okay, say goodbye to our friends.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you next week. God bless you.